It's now enough now!
Let me ask you something. What if the most important story ever told had been sitting in a dusty old book your whole life, and you never actually felt it? You heard the name. Maybe you grew up with it. Maybe a Sunday school teacher drew it on a chalkboard with a bad sketch of a slingshot. Maybe you caught a half-remembered episode of some kid's cartoon. But if you're honest with yourself, you never truly felt the weight of what this story is actually about. Because here's the thing, this isn't just a story about a boy who kills a giant. That's like saying The Godfather is just a story about a man who runs a restaurant. No. This is a story about what happens when the wrong person sits on the throne. When power gets corrupted by fear. When a kingdom built on God's blessing slowly turns into one built on a king's ego. And in the middle of all that chaos, all that jealousy, all that political manipulation, a teenager shows up. A shepherd. A kid who smells like sheep and sings songs to keep himself company in the fields at night. And somehow, that kid changes everything. Welcome, everyone. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found this channel. And today, we are doing a full deep dive, and I mean deep, into Angel Studios' animated epic, David, released Christmas season 2025. This is a 2-hour narration, so buckle in. Get your snacks. Get comfortable. Because by the time we're done, I want you to understand not just what happened in this movie, but why it matters. Why it moved families to tears in theaters across America. And why, for a faith-based animated film released on the same weekend as Avatar, Fire and Ash, this movie managed to pull in $22 million its opening weekend. I'm not exaggerating when I say this might be the most ambitious animated biblical film since The Prince of Egypt, and we're going to talk about that comparison at length. Let's get into it. Section 2, Movie Overview, the film at a glance. Narrator, shift to a more conversational, informative tone. Like a knowledgeable friend explaining something cool. So first, the basics, because context matters a lot here. David, 2025, is a CGI animated, biblically inspired musical adventure film, rated PG, running 1 hour and 55 minutes. It was produced by Sunrise Animation Studios, a South Africa-based studio, in partnership with Angel Studios, the faith-based distribution company that brought us Sound of Freedom, The Chosen, and more recently The King of Kings. The film was directed by Phil Cunningham and Brent Dawes, who also co-wrote the screenplay alongside Kyle Portbury and Sam Wilson. It's adapted, faithfully, mostly, from the Book of Samuel in the Old Testament. The story covers David's early life as a shepherd boy through his anointing by the prophet Samuel, his legendary defeat of Goliath, his friendship with Jonathan, and his eventual conflict with King Saul. Now here's something really interesting about the voice cast. The younger version of David is voiced by Brandon Engman, who fans of the prequel animated miniseries Young David from 2023 will recognize immediately. But once David grows up, once we're watching a full-grown soldier and future king, the voice shifts to Phil Wickham. And if you know anything about contemporary Christian music, that name rings a bell. Phil Wickham is a hugely popular worship artist, and this is his first animated film role. That casting choice isn't just a gimmick. As you'll hear, it works. Other key cast members include Adam Michael Gold voicing King Saul, Asim Chaudhry, a British-Pakistani comedian, lending real personality to a supporting character, Mick Brian Stivale as the prophet Samuel, and Lauren Daigle, another major name in Christian music, voicing David's mother. Lauren Daigle is an absolute powerhouse, and her songs in this movie are genuinely beautiful. The music was composed by Jonas Myron, a Grammy Award-winning songwriter who recorded the soundtrack with the Budapest Film Orchestra. The result is sweeping, cinematic, emotional, and it's charting. 6 songs from the film hit the Billboard Hot Christian Songs chart, including fan favorites like Psalm 8, Follow the Light, Shalom, and Tapestry. Now, to understand this film fully, you need to understand a bit about Angel Studios as a company and what they're trying to do. Angel Studios is essentially a faith-driven streaming and distribution platform funded partly by a community of over 1 million guild members, fans who invest in and promote the content. They are not a traditional Hollywood studio. They believe in crowdsourced, community-backed storytelling. And their track record, while not without criticism, includes some genuine cultural moments. Sound of Freedom. The Chosen television series. And now this. David actually had a rocky road to theaters. It was originally slated for November 2025, but a legal dispute between Slingshot Productions and Angel Studios, involving allegations of contract breaches, threatened to derail the whole release. The lawsuit was filed in March 2025 and wasn't resolved until October 2025, when Angel Studios and a company called 2521 Entertainment acquired full franchise rights and rescheduled the release to December 19, 2025, right in time for Christmas. That timing was no accident. Angel Studios positioned this as the family film of Christmas 2025. And against a crowded box office, competing directly with Avatar, Fire and Ash and the SpongeBob Movie, David still managed to debut at number 2 its opening weekend. For a faith-based animated film with a mid-sized budget, that is remarkable. On Rotten Tomatoes, it currently sits at 78% from critics and significantly higher from audiences. The IMDb score hovers around 6.9, a bit of the typical audience bifurcation you see with faith-based content, where some viewers score purely on spiritual impact and others score purely on filmmaking craft. We're going to talk about both today. Okay. We've got the overview. Now let's get into the story itself. And I want to take you through this scene by scene, not just what happens, but what it feels like to watch it unfold in a darkened theater. Section 3, the full story breakdown, scene by scene. Narrator, this is the longest section. Vary your pace. Speed up during action. Slow down during emotional beats. Let silence breathe between key moments. Act 1. The Boy in the Fields. The film opens in a way that immediately signals its visual ambition. We're in the countryside outside Bethlehem. Rolling hills. Golden light. The kind of landscape that feels ancient and alive at the same time. And in the middle of it all, we find young David, voiced by Brandon Engman, with his sheep. Now, a lesser film would just use this as a quick establishing scene before getting to the good stuff. But Cunningham and Dawes make a choice here that I think is essential to understanding what this whole movie is about. They let this opening breathe. They let us spend real time with David in his natural habitat. He's a shepherd. He loves his sheep. He knows their names. He sings to them. And the song that opens the film, which is genuinely gorgeous, sets up David as a person who finds joy in small things, in quiet faithfulness, in doing his job with care even when no one is watching. This is the theological heart of David's story, right? The famous verse from Acts 13:22 calls David a man after God's own heart. And the film wastes no time establishing that this quality doesn't come from being spectacular. It comes from being faithful in the ordinary. There's a scene early on where David saves one of his sheep from a lion. And this is directly from the book of Samuel. David literally says later in the biblical text that he killed both a lion and a bear while protecting his flock. The film depicts this with energy and real tension. Young David, armed with only a sling and stones, faces down a predator. It's the first glimpse we get of what he's made of. And crucially, he doesn't boast about it afterward. He just goes back to tending the sheep. This is the film building its hero correctly. Before the giant, before the battlefield, before the throne, there is just this boy, alone in the hills, doing what's right because it's right. Back home in Bethlehem, we meet David's family. His father Jesse, a well-respected man with several sons. And we meet his mother, voiced with warmth and elegance by Lauren Daigle. One of the film's most beautiful moments is an early musical number between David and his mother, and if you've seen The Prince of Egypt, you'll feel the echo of Miriam's Song of Moses here. It's deliberate, and it works beautifully. The song is called Tapestry. And in it, David's mother tells him something that becomes the philosophical backbone of the entire movie, that life is like a tapestry being woven. You can't always see the pattern from where you're standing. But God sees the whole picture. Every thread matters. The hardship, the confusion, the waiting, it's all part of something larger. This is not just a song. This is a thesis statement. And the film will keep coming back to it. The anointing, a secret that changes everything. Then things shift. The prophet Samuel arrives in Bethlehem. Now, Samuel, voiced by Stivale, is a fascinating character. He's a man of tremendous authority in Israel. A prophet. A kingmaker. And he arrives with a purpose. God has rejected King Saul, and Samuel has been sent to anoint the next king. He doesn't know exactly who it will be. Only that it will be one of Jesse's sons. Jesse lines up his sons one by one. Tall ones. Strong ones. Sons that look like kings are supposed to look. And Samuel says no. No. To every single one. There's a quiet comedy to this sequence. The older brothers are clearly expecting to be chosen, and you can see the deflation on their faces as Samuel keeps shaking his head. But then someone asks, "Is this all your sons?" And Jesse almost sheepishly admits that no. There's one more. The youngest. He's out with the sheep. They have to go get him. David doesn't even know the prophet is there. And when he arrives, probably smelling exactly as you'd expect a shepherd boy to smell, Samuel anoints him. Right there. Oil poured over his head. A blessing. A destiny. And David has absolutely no idea what to do with it. Here's what makes this scene so powerful. Samuel makes clear that this anointing is a secret. King Saul cannot know. Because if Saul finds out that another king has been anointed, he will have David killed. Simple as that. So David goes back to his sheep. With oil still on his head. With a prophecy he can't tell anyone about. With the biggest secret in the kingdom buried in his chest. Think about that for a second. Imagine being told you're going to be president, but you can't tell anyone, can't prepare, can't plan. You just have to wait. And trust. And go back to your regular life. That is where the real test of faith begins. Not on the battlefield. Right here, in the pasture. The court of Saul, playing music for a troubled king. Some time passes. And David gets an unexpected invitation to the royal court. King Saul, voiced by Adam Michael Gold with just the right blend of menace and pathos, is struggling. The biblical text says a tormenting spirit afflicts him. And in the film, this is rendered not as supernatural horror, but as something more psychologically real. Saul is a man eaten alive by anxiety, by pride, by the crushing weight of a crown he feels slipping from his head. Gold's voice performance here is genuinely layered. Saul isn't a cartoon villain. He's a man who was once chosen, who was once great, and who has slowly become the worst version of himself. The tragedy of Saul is that he could have been remembered differently if he'd simply been obedient. But he chose power over faithfulness, and the cost is eating him alive. Someone in court hears that a shepherd boy named David is an exceptional musician. So David is summoned. And here's a lovely scene. David arrives at the palace, wide-eyed, overwhelmed. This is clearly the largest, most intimidating place he's ever been. And yet when he takes out his harp and begins to play, something remarkable happens. Saul quiets. His restlessness subsides. The music reaches something deep in him. This creates the film's central irony, and it's one of the most profound ironies in all of biblical narrative. The man who is meant to replace Saul becomes the one person who can soothe Saul's tormented soul. The successor and the king, bound together, one playing music, one listening, neither yet knowing the full weight of what that relationship will become. David befriends Jonathan, Saul's son, during his time at court. And this friendship, which becomes one of the most celebrated in ancient literature, begins in the most natural, unforced way. They're just two young men who recognize something kindred in each other. Jonathan has grown up in the palace, surrounded by politics and expectation. David has grown up in the fields, surrounded by sky and silence. And somehow, they just click. The film handles this friendship with real warmth. Jonathan, voiced with nobility and decency, becomes David's anchor in the chaos of court life. And knowing what the audience knows, that David carries an anointing that could make him Jonathan's rival, every moment of their friendship is quietly bittersweet. The Valley of Elah, David and Goliath. And now we arrive at the moment everyone came for. The Philistine army has assembled in the Valley of Elah. And they have brought with them their champion, Goliath. 9 feet tall. Armored. Terrifying. Voiced with thunderous menace. For 40 days, the film compresses this. Naturally, Goliath has stood in the valley and bellowed a challenge across the lines. Send me your best warrior. Winner takes all. One fight. No armies needed. And for 40 days, not a single Israelite soldier has stepped forward. The film does something really smart here. It doesn't mock the soldiers for their cowardice. It humanizes them. These are men with families. Men who know, rationally, that fighting a 9-foot giant is suicide. Their fear is understandable. And the film plays that tension for legitimate comedy. There are genuine laugh-out-loud moments as soldiers make excuses, hide, or suddenly develop urgent tasks elsewhere when Goliath's name is mentioned. Then David shows up. He's been sent by his father to bring food to his brothers who are serving in the army. He's not a soldier. He has no business being here. But he hears Goliath's booming challenge, and he has one question: who is this uncircumcised Philistine to defy the armies of the living God? This is the moment the film has been building toward. Not just the physical confrontation with Goliath, but the spiritual confrontation with the question at the heart of the whole story: what do you actually believe? David's older brother mocks him. Go back to your sheep, little boy. You're here to watch, not fight. And David, and I love how Engman plays this, doesn't get angry. Doesn't get defensive. He just gets quiet. And that quiet is more powerful than any shout. Word reaches Saul. There's a kid who says he'll fight Goliath. Saul summons him, clearly expecting either to be amused or impressed. And David stands before the king, this same king he's been playing harp for, this same king who has no idea David carries an anointing, and says something remarkable. He tells Saul about the lion. About the bear. And he says, God delivered me from those. He will deliver me from this. It's not bravado. It's not arrogance. It's faith built on evidence. On track record. On personal history with a God who has shown up before. Saul agrees to let him try. He even puts his own royal armor on David, and this is one of the funnier, more charming moments in the film. The armor is enormous. David basically disappears inside it. The helmet alone could fit 3 of his heads. He can barely walk. And with good-natured practicality, David takes it all off. He doesn't need the king's armor. He has something better. He walks down to a stream. Reaches in. Pulls out 5 smooth stones. Puts them in his shepherd's pouch. And walks toward Goliath. Now here is where the filmmakers make a choice that I think elevates this scene above what it could have been. They don't rush the confrontation. They let the camera drink in the enormity of Goliath, and the smallness of David. When Goliath sees who has come to fight him, he laughs. Actually laughs. It's a contemptuous, dismissive laugh. The laugh of a giant who has never once had reason to doubt his own invincibility. And David speaks. And what he says is directly from the scripture, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." The sling goes up. The stone flies. And Goliath falls. Folks, I am going to be honest with you. Even knowing exactly how this story ends, even having seen this moment depicted in paintings, sculpture, and film 100 times, the way this scene is animated, the way the music swells, the way the camera captures the moment of impact and then the slow, earth-shaking descent of Goliath, it is genuinely thrilling. It is the kind of filmmaking moment that makes an audience spontaneously gasp and then break into applause. Families reported this happening in actual theaters. People cheering. And you know what? I get it. Because this is what great storytelling does. It makes you feel the truth of something you already know intellectually. Inspired by David's victory, the Israelite army surges forward. The Philistines, who had bet everything on Goliath, break and run. The battle is won. And David, the shepherd boy, the musician, the secret anointed king, stands in the valley with a stone and a sling. That was roughly the first act. And here's where something interesting happens that separates this film from what you might expect. Act 2, the rise, from hero to fugitive. Because, and multiple critics noted this, the Goliath fight happens at roughly the 50-minute mark. You're not even halfway through the movie. There is a full hour left. And what that hour is about is arguably more interesting, more morally complex, and more emotionally resonant than the famous fight itself. Here's the shift: David's victory makes him famous. And fame, it turns out, is dangerous. The people of Israel begin to celebrate David with an energy that outpaces their celebration of Saul. There's a song the women sing, and the film depicts this with uncomfortable clarity, that says, "Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." Saul hears this. And something in him breaks. Because here's the thing about insecurity in power, it doesn't need much fuel. A single comparison is enough. A single moment where someone else gets a bigger cheer. And Saul, who already knew, somewhere in his darkest moments, that God had turned away from him, now has a name for the thing he feared. David. David is made a commander in the army. He's brilliant at it. Every mission succeeds. Every battle is won. The people love him more and more. And Saul watches all of this with growing dread. In a particularly chilling scene, Saul sits alone in his throne room, and you can see the jealousy physically transform him. Adam Michael Gold's voice performance in these quieter, darker scenes is remarkable. This isn't ranting villainy, this is the quiet, cold calculation of a man who has decided that the only way to protect himself is to destroy the threat. To destroy David. Saul tries once to throw a spear at David while David is playing music for him. The film handles this carefully, it's depicted but not graphically, and what strikes you is how surreal it must have been for David. He is playing music to soothe the king. And the king hurls a weapon at him. And David just steps aside. And walks away without striking back. This is a theme the film develops with real intentionality. David's greatest strength is not his arm or his aim. It's his restraint. His refusal to return evil for evil. His commitment to not taking what has been promised to him by his own hand. Jonathan, watching all of this, is torn. This is his father. And this is his best friend. And they are on a collision course. There's a scene between Jonathan and David that is quietly devastating. Jonathan has to warn David that Saul intends to kill him. The friendship that began in the easy days of music and shared laughter is now something much more serious. Jonathan is risking his own position, his own life, by being loyal to David. And David is wrestling with the reality that he must run. That everything he has worked for, every honor he has earned, must be abandoned. The farewell scene between them uses minimal dialogue and maximum visual storytelling. Two young men who know they might never see each other again. The film earns this moment completely. On the run, caves, enemies, and the test of mercy. David becomes a fugitive. And this final stretch of the movie is where the screenplay gets genuinely interesting in its moral complexity. David ends up in a cave, and this scene is drawn from the famous episode in 1 Samuel where Saul, unaware that David is hiding inside, stops at the exact same cave to relieve himself. And David's men whisper to him, "This is God's moment. The king is right there. Unguarded. Kill him. End this." And David refuses. He creeps up in the darkness, and instead of striking Saul, he cuts off a corner of Saul's robe. Just a piece of cloth. Proof that he was there. Proof that he could have acted. And chose not to. When Saul exits the cave, David calls out to him. Holds up the piece of robe. And says, essentially, I could have ended you. But you are still the Lord's anointed. And I will not lift my hand against you. Saul, and this moment is heartbreaking, actually weeps. He acknowledges David's righteousness. He admits that David will be king. And for a moment, there is a window of reconciliation. But windows close, and Saul's heart hardens again. The film also deals with the Amalekite subplot. Saul was commanded by God to completely destroy the Amalekites, but he kept the best livestock and spared their king. This direct disobedience is, in the biblical account, the reason God rejected him. The film depicts this with an almost tragic clarity. Saul knew what he was supposed to do. He just couldn't bring himself to do it. He let pride and greed override obedience. The Amalekites in this film have a striking visual design. Critics compared it to the Tusken Raiders from Star Wars. Wrapped, desert-dwelling, intimidating. They function as a recurring physical threat in the second act, and David's eventual encounters with them give the film its final act tension. There's a second cave moment, a second time David has Saul at his mercy, and again, David chooses mercy over vengeance. By this point, the movie has made its argument clearly enough that even audience members who might have been rooting for David to just finish it already can feel the wisdom in his restraint. Because David understands something that Saul never did. A king who takes the throne by force is just a stronger version of the king he replaced. True kingship, the kind God endorses, looks different. It waits. It trusts. It refuses to become the monster it's fighting. The ending, the king who waited. The film ends not with David on the throne, and this is actually a smart storytelling choice that some critics questioned, but I want to defend. The movie ends with the death of Saul. Not depicted with celebration or vindication, but with grief. David, when he hears that Saul and Jonathan have died in battle, mourns. Not for Saul, necessarily, though even for him there is a complicated sorrow. But for Jonathan. His friend. His brother. The man who chose loyalty to David at the cost of everything else. And with that grief fresh, the film closes with David stepping forward, not triumphantly, not with fanfare and fireworks, but quietly, soberly, toward the responsibility that has been waiting for him his entire life. The final musical number, Follow the Light, is a stirring, genuinely moving piece that captures the emotional arc of the whole film perfectly. By the time it plays, you've been on this journey long enough that the music lands not as a commercial moment but as a genuine release. Multiple audience members and critics noted that tears were common in theaters during this final sequence. And based on the song alone, I believe it. It's a powerful ending. And it's honest about what David's story actually is, not a triumph story, but a faithfulness story. The triumph is almost secondary. What matters is who David was in the waiting. Section 4, Character and Performance Analysis. Narrator, more thoughtful pace here. This is your analytical section. Speak like a professor who also happens to be really passionate. David, the hero who doesn't act like one. Let's talk about the central character, and acknowledge up front the central critique that legitimate critics have leveled at this film. David, as written and performed in this movie, is not a particularly complex character on the surface. He is good. He is faithful. He is humble. He doesn't have a dramatic character flaw that he has to overcome. He doesn't go through a dark night of the soul where he nearly becomes the villain. He just consistently does the right thing, faces enormous obstacles, and comes out the other side. Variety's review called him a stubbornly dull anchor. And I understand that criticism from a pure screenwriting standpoint. In traditional story structure, we want protagonists who are flawed in ways that the story forces them to confront. David doesn't quite do that. But here's my pushback: I think that misses the point of who David actually is and what makes him interesting. David's flaw is his situation, not his character. He is a man who has been given a destiny he cannot pursue through conventional means. The only path to the throne runs through patience and restraint, qualities that are genuinely difficult to dramatize, but that the film tries its best to make visceral. The moment of not killing Saul in the cave is David's defining dramatic beat, and it works because by that point we understand the enormous cost of that choice. David is choosing to remain who he is in a situation designed to make him become someone else. That is a form of character struggle. It's just quieter than most. Brandon Engman, voicing young David, is delightful. There's a natural quality to his performance that keeps the character from feeling like a sanitized saint. He's curious, a little awkward, genuinely joyful, a real kid who happens to have extraordinary faith. Phil Wickham as adult David is a more interesting discussion. His voice is naturally warm and a little earnest, which fits the character perfectly. What he may lack in dramatic actor technique, he makes up for in genuine presence. When he sings, there is no question this is a man who believes every word. And in a faith-based film, that authenticity is worth more than technical perfection. King Saul, the tragedy in the room. King Saul is, for my money, the most interesting character in this film, and Adam Michael Gold gives the best voice performance in it. Saul is what happens when a person's identity becomes fully wrapped up in a position they hold. He was chosen by God. He was anointed. He was given everything. And somewhere along the way, the kingship stopped being something he was serving and became something he was protecting at all costs. Gold plays him with layers that the screenplay doesn't always fully provide. There's warmth in the early scenes. Saul genuinely likes David, even enjoys his company. And that makes the turn toward hatred so much more tragic. Because it's not hatred born from malice. It's hatred born from fear. From the knowledge that this boy might be everything Saul was supposed to be and isn't anymore. The film makes a sophisticated theological point through Saul's arc. The greatest threat to someone who uses God as a means to power is someone who genuinely loves God for God's own sake. Saul can't compete with that. You can't compete with something you've never understood. Jonathan, loyalty that costs everything. Jonathan doesn't get enough screen time, and that's a legitimate complaint. But what he does get, he uses perfectly. Jonathan is the rare character who is good and knows he's on the wrong side of history, and accepts it. He supports David not because David has power or political momentum, but because David is right. Because David is good. Because some things matter more than thrones. The David-Jonathan friendship is genuinely one of the most beloved relationships in all of ancient literature, and the film captures its essence, the kind of friendship that makes you a better person just by existing. The kind where both parties bring out the best in each other. And losing that relationship, which the film's ending implicitly acknowledges, is one of the genuine tragedies of David's story. David's mother, the emotional foundation. Lauren Daigle's casting as David's mother is inspired. Her voice carries a richness and depth that grounds every scene she's in. The Tapestry song, which she performs with David, is arguably the film's best musical moment, certainly its most emotionally textured. The film draws a deliberate parallel to the Prince of Egypt here, and it earns it. Just as Miriam and Jochebed provide the emotional and spiritual foundation for Moses' story in that film, David's mother does the same here. She is the one who teaches him to see the world correctly. To trust the pattern even when he can't see it. And that teaching becomes the lens through which David experiences everything that follows. Section 5, Themes, Symbolism and Subtext. Narrator, lean into your analytical voice here. This is where the real intellectual engagement happens. Vary between big ideas and specific examples. Faith as evidence-based trust. The most important thematic argument this film makes, and I want to be clear, it makes it well, is that faith, in David's understanding, is not blind optimism. It's not naive hope that everything will work out fine because it has to. David's faith is built on track record. When he stands before Saul and says God will deliver him from Goliath, he doesn't say this because he's heard it in a sermon. He says it because he has personally experienced God showing up when he was alone in the fields, facing down a lion. And a bear. And the darkness of night and the silence of waiting. This is a subtle but important distinction. And the film earns it by showing us those earlier experiences first. By the time David stands in the valley, his confidence isn't hubris, it's evidence. The tapestry metaphor, seeing the whole picture. The tapestry metaphor introduced by David's mother runs through the entire film like a thread, and yes, the pun is intended. From below, a tapestry looks chaotic. You see knots, loose threads, colors that don't seem to go together. But from above, from the perspective of the one doing the weaving, there is a pattern. A picture. A purpose behind every thread. This is the film's answer to the question every person of faith eventually asks: why is this happening? Why the waiting? Why the suffering? Why does the person chosen by God end up running for his life in a desert? The tapestry metaphor doesn't answer these questions with easy comfort. It answers them with trust. Not trust that everything will be painless, but trust that nothing is wasted. This is also why the film is more interested in David's character during the waiting than in his eventual triumph. The weaving is happening right there in the cave. Right there in the moment of choosing not to kill Saul. Right there in the grief of Jonathan's death. That's where the tapestry is made. Power versus authority, two kinds of kingship. The film sets up a deliberate contrast between two models of leadership. Saul has power. He has armies, palaces, political machinery. He has the ability to compel obedience. But he has lost his authority, the moral standing that makes leadership legitimate. David, for most of the film, has no power whatsoever. He's a fugitive. He's hiding in caves. But he has authority that grows with every right choice he makes. Every time he refuses to kill Saul. Every time he acts with mercy when vengeance would have been easier. Every time he protects rather than destroys. He is building something invisible but real, the character that will make him not just a king, but a good one. This is a message with obvious contemporary resonance. In a political climate where strength and righteousness are often presented as the same thing, the film makes a quiet but unmistakable argument that they are not. That real leadership is built on character, not just capability. The giant and the underdog, a universal story. And then there's the most universal theme of all, the little guy against the impossible obstacle. What makes the David and Goliath story endure across 3,000 years, across cultures and religions and contexts, what makes it the go-to metaphor for anyone facing an overwhelming challenge, is its insistence that size isn't everything. That the right tool, wielded with the right conviction, at the right moment, can bring down something that appears invincible. The film understands this. And it understands that the real message isn't believe in yourself. It's something more specific. Believe in what you believe in. Act from that belief. And don't get so distracted by the size of what you're facing that you forget what you're fighting for. Foreshadowing and callbacks. The film is also genuinely clever about foreshadowing. The smooth stones that David picks up at the beginning, while tending his sheep, are the same kind of stones he reaches for in the valley before Goliath. It's a visual callback that rewards attentive viewers. David has always been preparing. He just didn't know for what. The tapestry metaphor, introduced early, pays off every time it returns. By the final sequence, when you hear even a musical echo of it, it carries the emotional weight of everything that's come before. And Saul's armor, which David tries on and immediately sets aside, functions as a symbol throughout the second act. David is repeatedly offered the trappings of worldly power that don't fit him. And repeatedly, he sets them aside. He can only fight in his own armor. With his own identity. With his own tools. Section 6, Technical and Artistic Review. Narrator, this is where you get specific and visual. Help the listener see what you're describing. Animation, a quantum leap for faith-based film. Let me just say this plainly, this is the best-looking animated film Angel Studios has produced. It is not even close. Sunrise Animation Studios, the South Africa-based team behind this, has achieved something genuinely remarkable for a studio of their size and resources. The environments in this film are stunning. The rolling hills of Bethlehem. The golden grandeur of the royal court. The claustrophobic, torchlit caves of the desert. The massive, terrible scale of Goliath standing in the valley. Critics across the board noted the texture and depth of the visual design. The way light moves through fabric. The way wind moves through hair and clothing. The way water catches light in the shepherd's stream. These are details that a studio with a limited budget could easily have cut corners on, and they didn't. Stylistically, the film occupies a space that one critic described as between the star and the King of Kings, which is to say, more cinematically ambitious than typical faith-based animation, but not quite at the photorealistic heights of big-budget DreamWorks or Pixar productions. That's an honest assessment. There are moments where you can feel the budget ceiling. But there are also moments, the Goliath confrontation, the anointing scene, the emotional family scenes, where the animation is genuinely beautiful by any standard. The Amalekite character design deserves special mention. As I referenced earlier, critics compared their visual language to the Tusken Raiders from Star Wars, wrapped, desert adapted, with a visual otherness that makes them genuinely intimidating without resorting to racist caricature. They are designed as a militaristic desert culture, visually distinct from the Israelites and Philistines, and the design succeeds. Music, Jonas Myron and the Budapest Film Orchestra. The musical score is, alongside the animation, the strongest technical achievement of this film. Jonas Myron, the Grammy-winning songwriter who composed the songs, made a specific artistic choice to root the music in the musical traditions of ancient Israel. Hebrew words and phrasings appear in several songs. The Budapest Film Orchestra provides a sweeping orchestral backdrop that gives the music genuine cinematic scale. The 6 songs that charted on the Billboard Hot Christian Songs chart give you a sense of the range. Psalm 8 is meditative and devotional. Follow the Light is stirring and anthemic. Shalom is warm and communal. Adventure Song is playful and propulsive, clearly aimed at younger viewers but genuinely fun. Why God, My God is the film's emotional center of gravity, tackling the lament tradition in a way that might surprise audience members expecting only triumphalism. And Tapestry, as I mentioned, is the film's emotional foundation. The score between the songs, Joseph Trapanese is credited for additional music, supports the dramatic action without overwhelming it. The Goliath sequence in particular benefits from a score that knows when to escalate and when to go quiet. That silence before the stone flies might be the best musical choice in the film. Honest comparison to the Prince of Egypt, the songs in David are very good, but they don't quite reach the towering heights of Hans Zimmer, Stephen Schwartz, and the team that produced Deliver Us, When You Believe, and Through Heaven's Eyes. Those are genuinely transcendent songs that have lasted 25 years. David's songs are excellent. Whether they'll still be beloved in 2050 is a different question. Direction, Cunningham and Dawes. The directing team of Phil Cunningham and Brent Dawes brings clear visual ambition and a genuine love for the source material. Their choices, particularly around pacing the early pastoral scenes, holding on the confrontations between David and Saul, and letting the emotional beats breathe, show filmmakers who understand that audiences can handle silence and slowness if the story earns it. Where the direction occasionally falters is in the film's midsection, after the Goliath battle. Variety noted that the pacing becomes somewhat rote, events checked off a list rather than felt through. I think this is a fair criticism of the screenplay more than the direction, but the two are inevitably linked. When the writing becomes perfunctory, the direction can't always compensate. The cave scenes are the directorial highlights of the second half. The use of shadow, the claustrophobic framing, the visual contrast between the cramped hiding places and the open landscapes of David's earlier life, all of it tells a story about confinement and waiting that dialogue doesn't always need to spell out. Editing. Tom Scott edited the film, and the 110-minute runtime is both its strength and its weakness. At under 2 hours, the film moves at a generally good clip for adult viewers. But as some critics noted, and as some parents reported their younger children experiencing, there are stretches in the second act where the pace may test the patience of the youngest audience members. The transition between young David and adult David, where Engman's voice gives way to Wickham's, is handled efficiently. A brief ellipsis, a visual indication of time passing, and suddenly we're in a different world. It works. Section 7, Critical Review and Honest Comparisons. Narrator, be direct and opinionated here. This is where your personality shines. Defend positions but acknowledge counterpoints, what David gets right. Let me be specific about where this film genuinely succeeds, because I think some of the broader dismissals of faith-based animation can cause critics to undervalue real achievement. First, the theological intelligence of the screenplay. This is not a dumbed-down, Sunday school flannel board version of David's story. The film grapples seriously with questions of obedience, suffering, waiting, and the corrupting influence of power. The Saul storyline in particular is handled with real moral sophistication. This isn't a cartoon villain, and the film doesn't make it easy for you to simply root for his downfall. Second, the visual achievement. For an independent faith-based studio, the animation quality here is genuinely exceptional. The gap between what Sunrise Animation Studios has produced and what you would have seen from faith-based animation even 10 years ago is enormous. They are closing the gap with mainstream studios in real ways. Third, the music. Not all of it is equally strong, I'll be honest about that, but the best of it is genuinely moving. Tapestry and Follow the Light in particular are songs that will stay with you. Fourth, the tone. This is a film that is unashamedly faith-affirming without being preachy or condescending. It doesn't feel the need to hedge its beliefs or apologize for them. And it doesn't bludgeon you with them either. The faith just lives in the story naturally. That's harder to achieve than it sounds. Where David falls short. Honest critique time. The protagonist's lack of genuine dramatic struggle is a real weakness. David is essentially perfect throughout the film. He makes good choices. He expresses doubt but resolves it quickly. He grieves but not in ways that threaten to pull him off course. For a figure whose actual biblical story is extraordinarily morally complex, the man who later commits adultery with Bathsheba, arranges the death of her husband, and struggles with deeply human failings, this sanitized version can feel frustratingly incomplete. Of course, the film ends before those events. It is specifically the story of David's rise to the throne, not the whole of his life. And the filmmakers made a deliberate and defensible choice to keep it PG and family-friendly. But that choice comes at a cost to the character's dimensionality. The second half pacing issue is genuine. After Goliath, the film spends about an hour covering what happens next in the biblical account, and while each individual scene has merit, the cumulative effect can feel a little mechanical. The emotional peaks don't quite match the Goliath sequence, which creates a structural problem. The most famous, spectacular part of the story happens in the middle, and everything after it has to work uphill. Some of the humor is a little broad. The cowardly soldiers subplot provides genuine laughs, but it also sometimes undercuts the tension that the film is trying to build. There are moments where the tonal shift from epic biblical drama to family comedy is jarring. And this is a legitimate criticism from some viewers, those who wanted more direct, explicit experience of God in the film will be disappointed. David's relationship with God in the biblical text is intensely personal and conversational. He writes psalms directly addressed to God. He argues, he pleads, he thanks, he worships, all in the second person, directly to a God he knows. The film renders this more abstractly, as guiding light, as answered faith, as the outcome of trust. For viewers who wanted to hear God's voice in the story, or to feel the direct intimacy, the film falls short. Compared to The Prince of Egypt, the unavoidable comparison. I have to address this directly, because virtually every review of this film invokes it. The Prince of Egypt, released by DreamWorks in 1998, is the gold standard of animated biblical storytelling. It remains, nearly 3 decades later, one of the finest animated films ever made, faith-based or otherwise. The music is transcendent. The animation is staggering. The characters are complex, flawed, real. The emotional scope is enormous. And it doesn't flinch from the darkness of its story, the plagues, the drowning of the firstborn children of Egypt, the fundamental tragedy of 2 brothers on opposite sides of history. David is not the Prince of Egypt. It is not that good. I want to be honest about that. But here's the thing, very little is. And within the faith-based animation space, David is genuinely ambitious, genuinely accomplished, and genuinely moving in ways that put it in a different league from most of its contemporaries. The Christianity Today review, one of the most thoughtful I read, argued that David is closer to being a true spiritual successor to Prince of Egypt than most films that have tried. And I think that's right. It's closer than it's often given credit for. The parallels the film intentionally draws, David's mother as a figure like Miriam, the tapestry song echoing through Heaven's Eyes, the Israeli singer in the cast, are not accidental. The filmmakers know what they're reaching for. They don't quite get there. But the reaching itself has value. Compared to Sound of Freedom and Angel Studios' track record. Angel Studios has positioned itself as the alternative to Hollywood, a faith-driven studio telling stories that the mainstream doesn't tell. Their track record is interesting. Sound of Freedom was their breakthrough moment. A film about child trafficking that became a genuine cultural phenomenon, grossing over $250 million on a tiny budget, largely through community word of mouth. It was polarizing. Some critics found it dramatically effective, others found it propagandistic, but its impact was undeniable. David is a different kind of film from Sound of Freedom. It's not trying to be confrontational or politically charged. It's trying to be something genuinely for everyone, families, children, believers, skeptics. And largely, it succeeds on those terms. The 78% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics is notably higher than what many faith-based films receive, and the audience score is even higher. Whether Angel Studios can maintain this momentum and keep raising the bar of their production quality is the real question. David suggests they can. I hope they do. Section 8, Final Verdict, Rating, Impact, and Who This Is For. Narrator: this is your closing. Bring the energy up. Land this. Be definitive but warm. This is why they watched the whole video. So here we are. The end of the road. The verdict. I want to start with what this film meant to the people who saw it. Because box office numbers are one thing, but the reports coming out of theaters told a different story. Families weeping. Kids asking questions. Parents who grew up hearing this story in church feeling it for the first time in a new way. People who never went to church but came with their kids and left with something they weren't expecting. That is what good storytelling does. It takes something you thought you knew, or something you never knew at all, and makes you feel it. Makes it real. David, 2025, does that. Not perfectly. Not without flaws. But it does it. The animation is genuinely beautiful, especially for a studio of this size. The music is stirring, emotionally intelligent, and at its best moments, transcendent. The story, even in its simplified, family-friendly form, captures the essential truth of what David's life was about, that faithfulness in the ordinary moments is preparation for the extraordinary ones. That the person God chooses looks nothing like the person the world would choose. That restraint is not weakness, mercy is not naivety, and waiting is not failure. Does it have flaws? Yes. The protagonist could use a sharper dramatic edge. The pacing in the second act wobbles. Some of the humor undercuts the stakes. And for viewers who wanted a more direct, visceral depiction of David's relationship with God, the film's more abstract treatment will feel like a missed opportunity. But flaws and all, I think this film deserves to be seen. By believers and skeptics alike. By families with kids of all ages. By anyone who has ever faced a giant and wondered if they had what it took. You know what the film's deepest message is? It's not have faith and you'll win. It's something subtler than that. It's this. The question is never whether the giant will fall. The question is who you'll be when you're standing in the valley. And David, shepherd, musician, poet, warrior, king, was always going to be the same person in the valley that he was in the fields. Patient, faithful, unafraid of what he couldn't see because he trusted the one who could. That's a message worth spending 2 hours with. Who this movie is for? Families with children of almost any age, though I'd say the sweet spot is ages 7 and up. The Amalekite scenes might be a bit intense for very young viewers, but there's nothing here that's inappropriate. Anyone interested in animated filmmaking as a craft. The visual achievement here is worth studying. Fans of The Prince of Egypt and other animated biblical epics who have been waiting for something in that tradition. Anyone going through a season of waiting, uncertainty, or feeling overlooked. The story of David is, among other things, a story for people who have been passed over. Who have been told they're not the obvious choice. Who are doing the right thing in the ordinary places and wondering if it matters. It matters. The film makes that argument beautifully. My final rating. I'm giving David, 2025, a 7.5 out of 10. It's a genuinely strong film with real artistic ambition and meaningful emotional impact. It falls short of the heights it's reaching for, but the reaching itself is admirable. And on the specific terms of what it's trying to be, a faithful, family-friendly, emotionally resonant animated musical about one of history's most extraordinary figures, it largely succeeds. See it with your family. See it on as big a screen as you can. Let the music wash over you. And then go home and tell someone about the moment in the cave when David had every reason to strike and chose not to. Because that, right there, is the whole movie in one scene. And maybe the whole point of the story.